Welcome to a Bible talk from Lower Mountains Anglican Church.
Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth and all the birds in the sky and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done.
Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away."
Hello everyone, hope that you are keeping warm. If not, move closer to the centre. It's great to have Staff Sergeant Noah Colleen back with us today. Welcome back, mate. It's good to see you in one piece. And it's good to be able to open the Bible with you. It's been a while since I've been able to do that at 6 p.m, so I'm so thrilled that we can do this together as we start this new series. 1932, I'm sure you can all remember that. A great book called A Brave New World was published. Who studied at school? Yeah, there's quite a few there. It's the year 10 syllabus. Is that right, year 10? 11. Year 11 syllabus, okay. Depends on which school you're at, I guess, and how much you like English. The Wall Street Journal describes this book as one of the most prophetic dystopian works of the 20th century that must be read and understood by anyone concerned with preserving the human spirit in the face of our brave new world. The author, Huxley, I think, how do you pronounce his first name? Aldous Huxley, paints a picture of an unequal world, technologically advanced, where humans are genetically bred, socially indoctrinated, and pharmaceutically anaesthetized, all for the purpose of submitting to an authoritative ruling order, which, according to The New Yorker, comes at the cost of human freedom. So there's a whole bunch of people who've had a lot to say about this particular book. And dystopian storylines are actually not that uncommon. There are a lot of books over the years that have been released, and we've then seen them in many cases as movies. So have you heard of H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, or George Orwell's 1984, or Fahrenheit 451, or The Handmaid's Tale, The Hunger Games, Lord of the Flies, Ready Player One, Jurassic Park? Have I covered all of the demographics? Has at least everyone got something they can identify with there? Okay. Dystopian tells you something about humanity's future and what it will look like if we play. One of these days, we're going to read a book by Finn Beaton, who is reading his own dystopian novel at the moment. When's it getting published, mate? When's it going to be published? Okay, keep encouraging him. It's a riveting read. What is life going to look like for humanity? What is life going to look like for humanity? Well, today we start a new 4-week series called God and Life. And whilst this might be an ambitious series given the weight of some of the topics we're going to look at over the next few weeks, I'm hoping that this will be a conversation starter. What I'm really hoping is you'll go away into dinner, around the fire, into the conversations you have through the week at youth group, at growth group, and have the conversations. What do you think the Bible says about that? Do you think? Have the conversations. Because these conversations are good things for Christians to be talking about. And if you are here and you're not yet a Christian, and that's great, I'm so glad that you are here, what you'll hear today and over the next 3 weeks are how Christians can think about these very important topics. And I'm hoping that will give you an insight into the reason why Christians will think about these topics and why they are so important. And perhaps for all of us, it'll allow us to engage in a more intelligent way as we think about these particular areas. For Christians hold to the biblical view that God governs all of life. God governs all of life. He gives life, He shapes life, He takes life as He ushers people into eternity. In that sense, from the start of life, through the course of life, into the end of life, God holds the strings, so to speak. He governs our past, our present, and our future. Yet we live in a culture which values human autonomy, almost above all else that matters. You need to be able to make your own choices. And that, as choosing individuals, which we like to be, we will stand on our own 2 feet and make the decisions that we want to make that will determine what's best for me. That's the world that we live in. We value human agency and choice. And so a key question that we're going to be looking at across all of these 4 weeks is this one. How do we, as choosing individuals, make Christian decisions about life? How do we, as choosing individuals, make Christian decisions about life? And I'm hoping you'll be willing to engage on that, whether or not you are a Christian, because you'll be able to think about it and think, is that a good position to come from? What is helpful about that position? Why is it that Christians can or hold to that particular line? And so when you think about start of life matters, given that we now live in a world where we can medically prevent pregnancy, we can scientifically assess the viability of a baby and then legally choose whether we continue with a pregnancy or abort the baby before it takes its first breath, that topic we're going to look at as a start of life issue next week. How do we, as choosing individuals, make Christian decisions during life, especially concerning those who might have a limited capacity to make those decisions for themselves? Many around us live with various levels of disability, and that limits capacity to some degree. And that will be our topic in 2 weeks' time. And then, how do we, as choosing individuals, make Christian decisions about life when we are faced with end-of-life matters, perhaps due to sickness or quality of life? And that will be what we look at in 3 weeks' time. Now, it's not as simple as saying each person chooses for themselves. That would be lovely, but it's not as simple as that. For there are times when those types of decisions need to be made on behalf of the person in question. And abortion, disability, and euthanasia are 3 key areas where decisions are often made on behalf of the person who is most affected. And so I'm really hoping that this series will raise some topics for discussion and we'll be willing to push some of those things around. And I'm praying that we'll be willing to look into what God's Word says and find some type of guidance there as we engage with the world around. And so given I'm hoping that will be the case, how about I pray for that to be the case? Let me lead us in prayer. Dear Lord and Father, help us now to consider the value of life and to consider how we stand under your rule, yet in your complex world. When you brought the world into existence, you didn't only think it into existence, you spoke it into existence. And so help us now listen to your spoken, life-giving words. Amen. All right, you ready for this? Thank you. You ready for this? All right, engage brain, work on heart, Bible open. Let's work this one through. Let's set some foundations which will help as we raise the topics that are going to come up in the next 3 weeks. So this will be applicable for all of this series. The key tension point here will come down to understanding who has the greater authority. Does God have the right to determine our fate and to have the final say over our lives? Or should we? How about you talk to the person next to you and ask that question? Okay, friends. Let's see what the Bible has to say. We're helped as we look at the unfolding story revealed in the Bible, which incidentally is also the unfolding timeline of our history from creation, or Genesis, right through to what we would call new creation, which we also hear about in Revelation. You'll notice both of our readings covered both ends of the Bible today. For this series, we're going to be looking at several different passages of Scripture rather than locating ourselves in a particular passage, which is what we normally do here at church. We work our way through books of the Bible. And so for this particular series, we're going to be jumping around a little bit because we're trying to understand what the Bible as a whole has to say. And so, as always, it's going to be very helpful to have a Bible in front of you. Please do that. You know where to find them so that you can check out what I'm saying. Have a look at page 1. In the opening chapters of the Bible, we see God's creation of the world and of humanity. If you scan your eyes over the structure of chapter 1, you'll see that what God creates is very intentional, and you get to the very last verse of chapter 1, and he looks at all that he's made, and he says, it's very good. So he's quite pleased with himself, quite pleased with the creation that we have around us. In Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2, we see God speak, and the world come into a structured existence. And at the pinnacle of creation, he creates humanity. And so if you look at chapter 1, verse 26 and 27, God says, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, over the livestock and over all of the wild animals and over all of the creatures that move along the ground. And so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Repeated here in those verses, which makes it important, is that God created humanity in his image. This places humanity in a special and a superior position. Not a superior position in relation to God, but a superior position in relation to everything that God has created, the rest of creation. And what can we notice? Well, first, it's God's choice to create humanity. And unlike the animals, to create them in his own likeness. If you look at my dog and then you look at me, you will work out very quickly that we are different species. And you don't, it's not too hard to work that one out. And God has created humanity so that you can understand who and what humanity looks like. I'm not claiming to be God here, but I am made in the likeness of God. You are made in the likeness of God in a way that my dog is not. And for humanity to be like God, they also then have that wonderful position to be able to rule over creation. And so in that sense, we are supposed to be like God to creation. That is a special position. We also notice here that in the very last line there, you can see that in creation there is gender distinction, male and female, and together they are the image of God. With this distinction, he commands them to be fruitful and to fill the earth. And if you were to read on, like we did the first Bible reading as we went through, you would see that in the way that God creates, he's actually given the ability to humanity to create new human life for this world. And further, he gives provision so that humanity would thrive and gives them what they need to eat from every seed-bearing plant. And then when he's finished creating across the ways that he has created, he then looks at everything he has made from man to woman, and he rests and enjoys what and who he has created. In creation, we see God's intentional hand, and yet what is key is that humanity are made in his image. Now, given what we see in creation, does God have the right to determine our fate and to have a say over those he's created? Biblically, the answer is yes. That's for us to be able to work out now whether we can accept that position or not. Not because we're God, but because God's given us the brains to be able to think that one through so that we can make that decision for ourselves. A few years ago, I got to go hot air ballooning. It was an absolute thrill. Anyone been hot air ballooning? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, there's a few people who have been hot air ballooning. If you get a chance, apart from the terribly early morning, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to do. There's something absolutely peaceful and amazing about being lifted into the air and then flown by the will of the wind, wherever that's going to go. I want you to think of that balloon as God, our Creator, and the basket below as the world, his creation. And to those in the basket, you and I, representatives of humanity. Okay? Got the picture? This might help. I want you to be able to think of this, and this picture, what you see here is that God is doing the heavy lifting. And he's doing that so that we might be able to enjoy that beautiful rest and what it is that's created for us, and we get to enjoy a very enjoyable view. Now, there are other parts of the Bible that will help us see the character of God in creation, which will help shape how we might relate to him. And so we've also looked at Psalm 139, the first start of Psalm 139. We're going to be reading that over the next 4 weeks in the 4 stanzas that are there, but it applies to the whole series. It's a glorious psalm. And as we've only read the first 6 verses, we've done that, haven't we? I was out doing welcoming. Kezia, did we read Psalm 139? We will a bit later. Okay, so when you read Psalm 139 later, then you will notice about that first 6 verses that you have God depicted there as the all-knowing creator. Big theological word. He's the omniscient knower of creation. If we were to read on like we will next week, we would hear about his presence over all things, his omnipresence. And if we were to read the week after, his power over all things, his omnipotence, all big words. But what they do is they sort of show you the breadth of how great God is with and over his creation. But it's also a picture of God being involved in his creation, in the lives of those he's created in his own image, over time, over all knowledge, without limitation, and with an unending capacity. Unlike us, who doesn't have all of those qualities. Our reality, according to the Bible, is of a creator God and a creature us distinction. Where God as creator is bigger, has more authority than his creation. Yet one where, thanks to the character of God, the creation enjoys all of the spoils that are given to us by that creator. Now, if you think that one through, being made in God's image should give us a very strong basis for recognizing the importance of human dignity and equality, something that we often want to make sure happens. Well, the Bible gives us that as our basis. Humans do have dignity. They should be seen equally between one another. And that's because God has created us to be that way. We are not given a status which is dependent on our performance or our capacity by God. And this fact should keep us from thinking too much of ourselves, but equally it should stop us from thinking too little of ourselves. We are not self-contained. Our significance comes from the fact that we are made in God's image, whoever we are. And in that sense, we are not autonomous individuals taking on the role of the Creator. We are images. And our dignity comes from Him whose image we bear. So that when people look at the person of God, they should be able to see in that person God. And that is the basis which will help us consider how we value human life in others. Flip over to page 3. By now you probably still be in Genesis, but probably in about chapter 3. This first creation that we see in the first couple of chapters is corrupted and is made futile by the fall, which comes in Genesis 3. And perhaps you know the story. I'd be surprised if you didn't. Whilst enjoying the garden, humanity come across a serpent who challenges the authority of God as creator and suggests to the man and the woman that humanity could know better than him. Eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It'll do you no harm. In fact, when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil, says verse 5. This is sometimes called the noble lie, although there's nothing noble about it. For Satan here asked the woman and the man to do something that he won't. It's an exercise in deception, and one that will bring immediate division between God and humanity, between man and woman, and between humanity and the rest of creation. And that's what we experience now. But I want you, before we go into that, I want you to notice, look at verse 5 again, that the serpent's suggestion is that they eat of the fruit of this tree, then they will be like God. We already know that we are like God because Genesis 1 and 2 has already made that claim. We don't need to be more like God. They are made in the image and likeness of God. And in disobeying God, sin enters into the world. It's this event that brings what we know all too well, because that's our experience of the world all around us, and maybe that's our personal experience as we relate to the world around. Things like shame, verse 7. They made coverings for themselves because all of a sudden they're aware that there was something to be shameful about. Or fear. Verse 10, Adam says he was afraid, so he goes and hides. Verse 12, we talk about guilt. The man blames the woman and goes on and blames everyone else as well. And it's in this event that we see judgment enter into the world, for now there is a need to arbitrate between what is right and what is wrong. And it's this event which introduces limitation. For whilst new life and whilst work was part of creation, we still have to work, but it wasn't a burden. While we still were allowed to go out and multiply and be able to enjoy what that looked like, that was all part of creation. Well, now it's a burden, Verse 16, if you cast your eyes down to chapter verse 16, you'll see that there are now pains in childbirth, so new life hurts. And the burden of work, verse 19, by the sweat of your brow as you work the ground. That was introduced as part of our experience of creation. Let's go back to our hot air balloon. It's like we've jumped out of the hot air balloon basket and we've decided that we'd prefer to do it ourselves. And that involves getting on our own balloon and having to work to get the balloon off the ground so that we can enjoy the experience on our own terms. Getting frustrated when it means harder work or more responsibility, or getting annoyed when the balloon still gets carried off by the wind in a direction we don't always want to go. That's the picture of Genesis 3. For all of the damage that's done in Genesis 3, which we feel today, it's worth noting that the value of humanity does not change. The value of humanity in God's eyes, being made in His image, does not change. We are quickly reminded of our status under God. So flip over a couple of pages to Genesis chapter 5, verse 1. And you'll see here that as the account is written, you see Adam's family line, and we're reminded that God created mankind and made them in the image, in the likeness of God. That's now part of our world order, and yet that's still something that's important to God. Or flip across to Genesis chapter 9, verse 6. All of the world gets flooded because every inclination of the heart of humanity was evil all of the time. And so God floods out the world, and it's almost like hitting a reset button. And yet we still see after the flood that every inclination of the heart of humanity was evil all of the time. And yet He says, I want you to protect the life of humanity. I want you to protect the lives of one another. For whoever sheds blood, by humans shall their blood be shed. For in the image of God, God made mankind. He values us. For as devastating and corrupting that introduction of sin might be in the world, does not reduce the value in God's eyes of those He has created, but it has changed the way that humanity sees and lives under His rule. This is an exercise in self-elevation, where humanity has placed themselves equal with God. Actually, we see this with the Tower of Babel. So if you flip further forward again to Genesis 11, by the way, if we keep doing this, we'll manage to get to the end of the Bible at some point, maybe by Wednesday. We're not going to do that. But look at the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11. Here you have humanity at that time speaking all one language, coming together, building a tower. And they say, well, come, let us build for ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens so that we may be able to make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we'll be scattered over the whole face of the world. Sort of like saying, let's build something that we can see God eye to eye. And so we could be really on the same equal footing here. And then we'll feel really good about ourselves. Everyone will know. To be made in the image of God is no longer a privileged position. We now need to make ourselves better to be like God on our terms. And I don't think it's much more of a stretch to say that we've taken this even further and have now stepped into what we think is the role of creator. In many respects, we've put ourselves over God. So thinking about a hot air balloon, we've filled with our own version of hot air. We are now attempting to tell God how to make and fly the balloon. Now, we've been given our brains, we've been given the ability to reason, and our rationalism has allowed us to make all sorts of gains in scientific and often in our material abilities in the world that we live in. And that in some ways has also given us confidence to step into shoes that we need to be very careful about stepping into. We can now prevent life with all manners of contraception. We can create life with IVF and, to some degree, cloning. We can assess life with prenatal screening. We can prolong life, putting people on artificial medical equipment and intervening for them. We can support life, especially with those who need artificial intervention, and we can terminate life with abortion and euthanasia, and there's more. And for some of these, this ability is both extraordinary and now wonderful, because we can do what our forebears would never have been able or to dream about experience or having. But with each of these, we have the caution that we are not God, and there can be a fine line between making decisions which are not meant to be decisions that we should author. And that's the dilemma as we think Christianly. Are we stepping into God's shoes and trying to wear his moccasins? Because that is a dangerous game. And the danger is that when we want to shape life for our particular circumstances, or to take it in a particular direction because of whatever individual matters we need to deal with, we end up making a whole bunch of moral choices. And those moral choices really aren't just about me, it's about all of us. And it's very, very hard to regulate all of us when we don't know all about it, as God does. So it's like we are working desperately hard to get our hot air balloon into the air, but we realize that some people will weigh us down. And so for some, we stop them from getting into the basket in the first place, and we make decisions about start of life. And for some, they've made it into the basket, but we look down upon them and place them in the corner because they seem to be of limited value when helping the balloon to fly. And so we make decisions about how they should experience life. Or for some, their usefulness in the balloon basket is no longer needed. And so we encourage them to, or we pick them up and throw them out of the basket to lighten the load, and we make decisions about end of life. The story of the Bible is the story of God's dealings with his creation and his people, and it highlights our very dependent nature, whether we realize that or not. And for what we achieve, we do that as fallen and limited beings, yet we do that whether we like it or not, under the hand of God. Okay, let me stop there for a moment. How are you going? You need to take a breather. You need to turn to the person next to them and jib them in the ribs. You feeling all right? Well, enter into this imperfect world comes the perfect man, Jesus. Turn with me to Colossians chapter 1. Colossians chapter 1, towards back, New Testament. Look for all of the eons, then go to the last, almost the last of the eons. Colossians chapter 1. And verse 15 tells us that the firstborn over all creation is Jesus, the Son, who is the image of God. In him all things were created. Through him and for him all things were made, be that in heaven or on earth. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Now, whilst we, thanks to our sin, might be a poor representation of the image of God, Jesus is the perfect image of God. To see him is to see God. To hear what he says is to hear the words of God. To know him is to know the fullness of God. You can see that in verse 19. God was pleased to have his fullness dwell in him. When we look at Jesus, we're looking at God. And the glory of this is that while we are sinners, Christ died for us. Our limitation was not his limitation. And if you look at verse 21, you can just see why that is so incredibly important that he does what he does. Because once, he said, you were alienated from God and were enemies in your minds because of your evil behavior. There's Genesis 3, and our existence ever since. But now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you wholly in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. That looks like a pretty clean slate. Looks pretty beautiful to have somebody step in and do that for us. What that means is that Jesus has stepped into our shoes so that we don't have to step into God's shoes. Or maybe he steps into our shoes because we've tried to step into God's shoes. He has become the perfect mediator between God and humanity, that despite what we have tried to do, which has resulted in rejecting God, he has restored a way to live again under God. And so in Jesus, he presents us not as tainted, blemished, and a poor representation of God. He presents us as the perfect, unblemished, free people of God. People who look like him. It's like Jesus steps into the hot air balloon basket for us and invites us all to go in with him so that we can again enjoy some of the beautiful and peaceful things about being lifted into the air and then flown by the will of God wherever it is that God decides to take us. As we come to consider matters of start of life, matters that arise during life, and matters to do with the end of life over the next few weeks, as we think about what our Christian response might be, especially when it comes to making decisions on behalf of those who are not able to make those decisions for themselves, it is worth recognizing that we already have someone doing that for us. Jesus. He knows our sin. He sympathizes with our weaknesses. He knows our pains and our burdens. He knows our hearts. He knows our past, our present, and he even knows, unlike us, our future. Such that he can look beyond our circumstances to what is to come. And we hear that, we're given a snapshot of what that looks like in the very last book of the Bible, in Revelation. And so when you go to Revelation 21, we read about a new heaven and a new earth, to the dwelling place of God, and God dwelling there with his people all around him. It's a picture of the garden, but better. It's a picture of a garden that doesn't have the risk of limitation, of a garden that now is unlimited. And to know that this new creation has, in verse 4, no tear, no death, no mourning, no crying, no pain, for the old, fallen and limited order of things will have passed away. Where death has died and life now lives. The perishable will be imperishable. The dishonorable will be glorious. The weakness that we feel will be strength. And we will be profoundly changed to be like Christ and see him as he is. What is life going to look for humanity? Well, it's not going to be dystopian in the sense that it's not going to be a dehumanized experience. it's not going to be one that we need to fear. It will be wonderful. Just as God has created it to be. And I hope that that's what we'll be able to think about in the next 3 weeks.
You have been listening to a Bible talk from Lower Mountains Anglican Church. If you'd like to know more about Jesus, get further information, or download other resources, please visit our website at lmap.org.au.